Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Hope everyone's doing great. Welcome to Anomalous America, episode 11. Thanks for your patience and understanding as always. Family life always has to come first, and I'm a week behind on the episodes. So thanks to everyone here. Let's make sure everything's working. We're up and going. How's my mic sound? I got some new drivers for my microphone, and anyone knows software changes can mess things up. Everything sound okay? Hope everyone's doing well. Sounds good. Perfect. Video's up. Okay. Yeah, so like I said, episode 11. This is kind of a big pivot for the show, and really important. I've kind of been waiting for this moment. That not to say that I've been enjoying the transition. And again, for some of you people here in the Midwest, the other people, Idaho, Montana region, Wyoming, I'll be making my way up there, I promise. We're going to do every state. So I know people are really interested in, wherever they're specifically from, but we're going to get there. Yeah, shout out to my interview with Greg from the Higher Side Chats went live yesterday. So if you are familiar with the Higher Side Chats, go check it out. And if you've already heard it, awesome. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, just an overwhelming experience as I've been listening to Greg for, I think, close to 10 years now. And yeah, fantastic conversation. We covered a lot of ground. So, and if you don't know who the Higher Side Chats podcast is, check it out. The first hour is free for anybody. I'll put a link in the description. But if you are interested, yeah, I'm here from the awesome Thomas. That's great. Yeah, that was oh, thank you, Joe, for the link. There's a link in chat right there. If you aren't familiar, I would check it out. If you know my work and not Greg's work, there's a lot of great overlap there. And yeah, getting to cover some of what we've talked about here now. If you've been with me for a while and been watching the Anomalous America stuff, you're kind of aware, at least, or have a foundation of what a lot of my work focuses around. And from Alaska all the way to Louisiana now, we've pretty much shown that in every single state there has been incredibly advanced ancient civilizations of not just small tribes, but the largest cities in the world, to quote the authors, and the largest buildings in the world, again, to quote more of these authors and archaeologists and explorers, and the most ancient mines in the world, the largest mines in the world. As we get farther up the Mississippi, so I'm going to start doing the votes again, right? Louisiana won by a landslide. We're going to go Oklahoma. Oklahoma's going to go on the backs. It's going to go on the back burner for a little bit, so I apologize. But we're going to hopscotch up the Mississippi River. So the vote for next week's episode is going to be Arkansas versus Mississippi. And then we're just going to kind of make our way up the Mississippi River. For obvious reasons, the Mississippi is one of the deepest and richest areas in America. And I think it's just an important thing. And that's kind of why the focus of this episode is going to be a lot about the Mississippi River. If you aren't familiar with my work with Dr. Longo, we talk a lot about the Gulf of Mexico being the true Fertile Crescent. And New Orleans was called the Crescent City. And we're going to get into a little bit of the history of New Orleans. New Orleans. Who were the French? What was the real historical value of the Louisiana Purchase? Who was Napoleon? Who were the Cajuns? Who were the Huguenots? And the Arcadians, or the Acadians? You know, if you've been following me for a while, I've posted a lot over the years about Canada and being the Canaan of the Phoenicians, the Phoenician, Canadian, Great Lake mines of the copper mines. So you find this copper all over the entire world. And the trade routes here. There's just, again, we could talk endlessly about that, but the Akkadian relation with the Mi'kmaq language, being one of the closest living relatives to what we know as Egyptian today. This relates as well to my Utah episode where we discussed the Danite militia of Utah who were ready to go to war with the Union. This is the same narrative, believe it or not, with Louisiana. And the quote Confederacy was predominantly made up of swarthy old world Jews, which is crazy to talk about. But the Danite relation, um, you know, my wife is Mormon, and she comes from a gigantic Mormon family with over 300 years of history in America, coming from east of the Mississippi. And Joseph Smith, the Micmac tablets, Egyptian tablets that he found in New York. Not to get too far off subject, but there's a lot to talk about there. And I know people have their feelings about Mormonism now, but we're talking about Mormonism, the tribe of Dan, the Danites, from a previous age, kind of what, again, we're revealing here with the archaeological evidence. And that we're having to basically completely. Hey, Jen, thanks for joining. Yeah, I should talk about that real quick before I get off too far off subject. So memberships are up, and yeah, it's $3 for the entry level one. Different chat functions, emotes and stuff like that. And then level 2 is $7, and that includes early access to some of my video series. Every month, I'm going to do a members early access video series. For those that don't want to join, no pressure. You're still going to get the videos. The members are just going to get the videos 2 weeks before anybody else. For this month in June, the topic is Atlantis. So I have 2 videos up already. They're pretty awesome. 2 more in the works. And then the following month is going to be Lemuria. So yeah, again, no pressure. I want to make sure that even people that can't afford it or don't want to do memberships, you're still going to have access to the videos. You're just going to have to wait a little bit longer. Making a Rumble. I do plan on making a Rumble. Yes, of course. Again, the problem is time. I am actually working on a Substack. That's where I'm putting what little bit of transitional time for the channel I'm putting into Substack. As I start to openly talk about some of my more controversial topics, the big ones being medicine, politics, I'm not going to even risk putting them on YouTube. So, yeah, so I will be uploading and transitioning older material to Substack, but there will be Substack only material. Just trying to diversify, and unfortunately, because of the platform with YouTube and censorship, I won't even bother. I'm just going to start by putting some of what I feel is too risky to put on YouTube will be on Substack. So that's going to be up by the end of the month. I have a podcast in the works as well for people that want just um, an auditory experience or something they can listen to at work or while they drive. Obedient to you. Thank you. Look into Obsidian. Long-term future storage free. Oh, cool. I will. Thank you so much. I thought you were meant to look into Obsidian, the stone. I talk about Obsidian all the time. Petrifactions are, it's pretty amazing. A tree hit with the right voltage can turn into Obsidian, which is crazy. Um, at work listening. Perfect. Ian, thanks for being here. So yeah, I'm trying to kind of diversify and have has as many options for you guys as possible. So if you like specific things, there'll be something for you. If you listen to my interview with Greg, I talked about my real kind of next venture is going to be um yeah, thanks Anthony. Not everyone supports the whole thing, but you know, um my time is my most valuable asset and it's yours as well. So it's not for everybody. So I just want to make sure you can have the choice. And if you want to support me further, then there are a lot of options. And if you don't want to pay, that's totally fine too. Um, again, just leaving it open to the viewer. But yeah, time is precious, and I'm grateful for every one of you that's here. And I don't ever want to take advantage of your time. And I want to, we need some fair exchange. Hopefully, you feel like you're getting that with me. But yeah, so again, really quick, I mentioned this on the Higher Side Chats interview. You spend enough time in this conspiratorial realm, you can feel a bit defeated and like the world's kind of stacked against you. And ever since I started having children, I've kind of been trying to morph my mindset, you know, change the way I think and look at life. And so this podcast series is going to be called The Kingdom of Heaven. And it's going to be kind of my own interpretation of the Bible, not as a literal text per se, but more as a metaphysical, alchemical kind of hero's journey. What that means, you are what you think about, and that, you hear me talk about the quintessence and these elements and alchemy and the ether and what that really means as far as creating the world you want to live in and navigating a world full of lies and deceit and it can be heavy at times. So yeah, that's going to be something to try to kind of help people navigate um a life as a truther, whatever that means. That means different things to everybody else, but yeah, Gnostics in a way, absolutely. And not getting brought down by anything. You can't ever let these subjects change the way you live your life, and you have to create the life you want for yourself right now. So yeah, random, just covering kind of some of what I've been working on. Um, and yeah, so thanks for sticking with me through that. Let's get to some material. Um, I want to do a quick little revision, or not necessarily revision, but I want to go back through since it was so long ago now. Geez, it was, a week and a half ago since I did, excuse me. It's been about a week and a half since I did the preview episode. And I know a lot of people don't see the preview episodes. So what I want to do here is go back through that real quick and do a quick summary. It's a pretty long one, so we don't need to go through the whole article. Okay, that's not what I wanted. Okay. It's not showing up, but I'm selecting it. Okay. That was weird. So, yeah, for those of you who saw the preview episode, fantastic. I'm going to make this quick for those that have not. This one is called Great Animals Roamed the State. This is a Louisiana publication from the 1920s. And like I said, I'm going to do a quick little summarization so we don't waste too much time because this is a big, big article. When the world was in the noonday of its fifth geological stage, computing time by the chart of Chamberlain and Salisbury, just about the period perhaps when man, as a highly developed and intelligent animal, was taking his place in the scheme of existence in Louisiana. A wilderness of thick forest, vast swamps, and wet plains was the home of Mastodon, ancient elephant, Equus excellis, the horse that had evolved through the labored process of hundreds of thousands of years from tiny Hydrocortium of the lower Eocene. And man, the highly developed and intelligent animal, was the destroyer then, just as he is the destroyer now. And in shrinking, yelling bands, he ranged from the forest and the prairies, warring on the mastodon and other beasts, and slain for profit and sport. Now, I chose this one just because of the continual narrative again that we keep finding with giants warring with huge animals. And this was no different here in Louisiana. Again, every state. Why that's important is because just like the ancient constructions we're uncovering together, and uh, the narrative that from Alaska all the way to Louisiana, it was a tropical setting, and the world was pretty much all the same. At least all of the states. I mean, Alaska is a very, very different climate today, and it's very far away geologically from Louisiana. But they had literally the exact same climate, the exact same type of flora and fauna and animals. Louisiana still has I would say, similar ecosystem to this time period we're discussing, but obviously we all know Alaska does not. A lot of the coral that's alive still today in the Gulf of Mexico, you found all over Alaska. I mean, you don't find it today, but you did then. And these corals survive in a very specific temperature. So we can show pretty clearly that not only has the the atmosphere and the surroundings changed, but the ocean temperatures have shifted as well. Now, what this goes on to describe is similar to what we were showing in the Nevada Carson City Footprints article, which, if you haven't seen Anomalous America Nevada, I'd go back and watch that. I recommend them all, but I also have a short clip of that, so you can just watch that one. I'll put that in the description as well. But a 10-foot tall giant was building a hunting blind, basically, something covered by foliage, by the lakeside, and he was hunting elephants. So 10-foot tall giant. He had like a size 16 or 18 shoe. I can't remember exactly. And he had a giant dog by his side. So ancient giant man was hunting huge elephants all over America. They were keeping even pet dogs then. And yeah, so just kind of uncovering that same narrative. And you'll find as we get farther through here, these mounds they uncover, um, and farther up the Mississippi, 10-foot tall giants, that's going to become normal. And 8 feet, 7.5, 8 feet is closer to the surface level. This ties in with what me and Dr. Longo have been talking about for a while, not just with Florida, but the entire Gulf of Mexico. And as we get farther up the Mississippi, 10-foot tall is going to be more average than 7 feet, believe it or not. And as they're mentioning here, they're talking about the ancient horse. Well, in some of my articles, we've shown that not only were there pygmy horses, there were giant horses living in the same time frame. So they like to use the transitory period of the evolution of the horse to enhance this whole million year narrative. But the reality is, we had pygmies and dwarfs riding small miniature horses in the same time frame as we had giants riding horses that were 20, 30, 50 feet tall. If you haven't seen Anomalous America, California, we uncover the largest skeletons of man and animal found in America were found in California. Um, so next month in my members series, when we get into Lemuria, we're going to show how science science people were postulating that California as an island was Lemuria. Really interesting, and the fossils and the giants there make that have a really great correlation as we transfer ourselves more eastward here in this series. So basically, what this goes on to see, and again, I've had this in a shorter video. So if you want to see me talk about the entire article, just look up Anomalous America episode 11 preview on my channel, and you can find the whole article. But it's describing the similar setting to what we've been saying: giants, giant men hunting giant animals. And often you'll find me mentioning Edgar Casey. Edgar Casey's Story of Atlantis is probably my favorite book on Atlantis. I strongly recommend it. It's under $10. You can get it used for $5. If you love the Atlantis material, that's my favorite book. But basically, what he describes is giant men, giant advanced men, men and women, but you get what I'm saying. We're warring with huge creatures, huge giant sea serpents, giant land animals, reptiles, and that man really wasn't warring with itself or with other men or other tribes, but they were warring with titanic animals. And I have more and more over the years of doing this show and posting all the things I posted and dissecting all these newspapers, not just newspapers, newspapers came secondary. It was really books for me. And I feel more and more like his book on Atlantis is the most accurate that I find. So if you aren't familiar with that, you definitely got to check it out, and it's a relatively cheap find. All right, we're gonna hop onto my Twitter feed here and kind of go down the list of things that I've arranged, and we're gonna kind of stray off as we go farther along here. So again, if you don't follow me on Twitter, you don't have to. That's fine. You can just I'll have a link in the description again, and I have them in every single one of my videos. You don't have to have a subscription. You can just go to my channel. And every week for every episode, I do a thread that kind of covers some things I'm interested in, things I'm going to talk about. It allows the viewer to go back after the fact and read these articles with a finer tooth comb, or research them on their own, or whatever it is they want to do. So here's just a few images I've posted. Here's Louisiana, 1770. Yeah, Louisiana's down here. You can see New Orleans, ancient New Orleans here. See if I can. Of course I can. Okay, let's make this a little bit. See if I can go bigger here. Does that help? No, it doesn't. Okay, that's. So again, another reason you can click on these your own and magnify them, download the images, whatever you want to do here. But a really important thing to note as well is look at the inlet of the Mississippi River here. This is something we're going to talk about as we get further along here. But yeah, New Orleans, very Star 40, very, very Star 40. And you'll see an even better rendition of this. A narrative that needs some investigating is ancient star forts in America, and how they're almost always called either Civil War related or that they're built by the French. Now, Louisiana is the perfect transitory period for why all the star forts are called French, at least many of them, especially on the Mississippi. Now, if you remember in that first image from the 1700s, right? If you look here, I know it may be hard to see. You can see it okay. Here's the inlet to the Mississippi. Now, when you go back beyond the 1730s, 1740s, even, this inlet doesn't exist, um, which is incredibly interesting. And we'll get into some of the canal construction, the advanced um, river development that was going on here in Louisiana. Here's the best example of this. So you can see the inlet here into the Mississippi. This didn't exist. This is all man-made. And so many times we hear about the horse and buggy narratives, and how some of these amazing cities of America, let alone the world, were being built with such um, you know simple technology. Now, the canal making, which we've pretty much covered again from Alaska all the way through to Louisiana, the canal systems of ancient America they blow your mind. They're absolutely gigantic. They are monumental amounts of labor, and they're hypothesizing the acreage and the flow for how many people these types of canal systems were feeding. And it's millions and millions and millions, far larger than anything we could have ever, at least that we've ever been told about the size of these populations and these people inhabiting these regions. And why this is important, again, this is our introduction to the Mississippi, and it's an important, um, it's the Great River, right? Um, Ancient maps have it called the Great River, the River Sham, and even Columbus, who called this area Asia. And when you look at the concept of an island west of the Straits of Gibraltar, and, the old descriptions of what we call Atlantis today, and what people were saying in the 1400s about America, it seems very obvious to me that when they say Atlantis, they're not describing necessarily an island, but I would say they're describing the Americas. Anyways, so the amount of work that would go into building something like this in the 1700s, you can only imagine, right? It's pretty crazy. Um, Kind of a good introduction into understanding what exactly it is that's going on here, and the canal works and all that is a really important um, marker as to what kind of technology and um, understanding of waterways and all this we had back then. This is a map of the World Cotton Centennial. This is a World's Fair that kind of goes under the radar, and a lot of people don't know about. This right here is the main building. It was the largest building ever made, 1885. Actually, it was finished in 1884, but the the centennial went into 1885. The inside of this building, everyone's used to large buildings, and I don't spend too much time talking about these expositions because it's kind of the same narrative every city. But the inside of this building, for those of you who are interested and want to dig on this one a little bit more, the inside is insane. It's like, it looks like a giant airplane hangar, and the amount of steel used to construct this. A lot of people who have kind of dissected the whole exposition and showed that a lot of the buildings were made of wood, and were cast with plaster, and were really made on site and weren't as ancient as people think they were, which is true in some regards, but in other places it's not. Some of these buildings are very old and have been repurposed. This one's incredibly interesting. I mean, the inside is insane. Here's the horticultural hall. Again, another just amazing one. On top of this building was a giant light. This is 1884. Huge light show. This building was all electrified. Not too crazy, but right on the cusp of the whole electrification concept. And New Orleans was one of the first electrified cities in America. So yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but for a lot of people, they didn't even know about this one. And yeah, these buildings are all gone, of course. And a lot of people had never seen that New Orleans was the most obvious example of a star fort, in my opinion. Right? This is exactly what it looked like. In fact, when in the like 1930s and 40s, post World War One, when they were doing some revisions, they were finding walls that went down 40 feet. So, which is not that crazy. When we start to get farther up the Mississippi, we're going to find a lot of star forts, and they're going to be monsters. I just did a video yesterday. One of my mods could link my video yesterday. Who built ancient America? And they're talking about one of these forts, and I believe it was Missouri. And the dimensions and the size and scope of these forts is absolutely unbelievable. We're talking walls that were over 100 feet tall, stone hewn, and 80 feet thick. They're describing this essentially a redoubt, a star fort, the citadel towers, and it's buried. This thing's ancient. They by the tree growth alone, they're assuming that this building had been buried 1,000 years. So, did the French really build these forts? I think some of the forts were built by the French. But again, when you get far enough into these stories, you find a lot of holes in the narrative of the French. Like the French language is new to France. It's the youngest language of France. Again, France is, as we know it, um, it's a new name and it's a new language. So who were the French before the French? Really interesting. You're going to find a lot of the Huguenot, old world Jew relations that we were first discussing early on in the show with the tribe of Dan and the tribe of Dan and their relation in Mexico and Florida, the Danites, the Moors, the Huguenots, the French. It's the whole narrative of the Louisiana Purchase and Napoleon take on a very odd hue. And France, as we know it today, is a rebranding of an older civilization. And this keeps leading back to, again, as I was saying, with the Acadians, the Akkadians, right? Old world Akkadian, Canada. Yeah. The Akkadians were called gypsies. Now, the word gypsy comes from the Egyptians. And, they were called vagabonds and, thieves. And it's very interesting. And you can kind of tear that narrative apart. I've been showing and clipping stuff about who the gypsies were for quite a few years now, but the relation is very interesting, and it brings the old world much closer to our timeline. So yeah, back to this. So we started with the Mississippi. We showed some of the kind of crazy canal work that was going on. Um, and I want to start with this article here. Age of the Western Hemisphere. Evidence that it was inhabited by man before the flood. A course of lectures on Egypt and the Egyptian is being delivered in one of the churches in Chicago. And again, why this is so important. Um, is the Mississippi the true River Nile? It's a very interesting subject. And as we get farther up the Mississippi, Egypt is going to take kind of a turn. And since we've already been showing that just about every state from Oregon to Louisiana has Egyptian relics, Egyptian iconography, Egyptian hieroglyphics, and pictographs found all over those states, Egyptian mummies, it gets very interesting. Remember, a lot of the mummies um, found in America, again, quote, the oldest mummies in the world, were being stolen by the Smithsonian. This is verbatim of the governor of Colorado in the 1800s. The Smithsonian is tearing down ruins and stealing our mummies and shipping them to Europe. So are the museums of Europe and the mummies of Europe really from Egypt? Which Egypt are we talking about? Because ancient America was also known as Egypt, or referred to as Egypt, the land of Kemet. And again, a good transitory period, because as we go farther up the Mississippi, this is going to be one of the important things we touch on is, um, Cairo and all these places on the Mississippi. Are they the old versions or the new versions? I don't know. We'll dive into that more. The minister has evidently made a long and careful study of the subject, and his object is to prove the authenticity of the Word of God by the results of recent archaeological research in Egypt and Palestine. The lectures are very edifying and interesting and are illustrated with maps and pictures. Referring to the exhumation of images and bas reliefs in Egypt, he recently called the attention to the extreme age of these works of man. Many of them are sculptured images of Ramses. Now, remember the name Ramses? As we get into Florida, we're going to show that the the oldest versions and depictions of Ramses come from Florida, not Egypt. Now, why is that? Um, Ramses and his succeeding sons, Ramses the Third, is the one we'll touch on the most. Seems to be the territory of Florida. King Ramses and his sons were kings of Florida. The first kings of Egypt. Where's Egypt? But the remarkable fact connected with these researches is that although many of these monuments have been unearthed and the ancient hieroglyphics contained on them have been deciphered. Now remember, even the kings of what we call Egypt in Africa, their history says they came from the West. So post cataclysm is what I would say. And they ventured from the Yucatan and the Gulf of Mexico. Ancient hieroglyphics contained on them have been deciphered. Not one has been found which will disprove a biblical statement, but on the contrary, many of them verify the historical statements of the Bible. The estimated age of the oldest of those sculptured stones is 4,000 to 5,000 years. Although this period of time appears to be a remarkably long one, it constitutes but 1/20th of the age of the remains of a man recently found in the United States. Not in Gliddon's Types of Mankind says, the continent of America is often designated by the appellation of the New World, but the researches of modern geologists and archaeologists have shown that the evidence is in favor of high antiquity during our geological epoch, as well as our fauna and flora, just as we've been showing again from Florida or from Alaska all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. Gigantic, titanic fauna and flora of a tropical age are, to say the least, as great on this as on the Eastern Hemisphere. Now, again, we've been talking about so many different authors saying the same thing. Oh, this is the oldest mummy. This is the oldest example of corn. This is the oldest example of wheat. All these different things. It takes, many different subjects and different levels of uncovering of each of these different subjects to kind of add to the, kind of the puzzle pieces to this bigger overarching idea that America certainly isn't the New World, but a buried and destroyed and rot old world. Professor Agassiz, whose authority will hardly be questioned in matters of this kind, tells us that geology finds its oldest landmarks here, and Sir Charles Lyell, the noted geologist, from a mass of well-digested facts and from the corroborating testimony of good authority, concludes that the Mississippi River has been running in its bed for more than 100,000 years. Again, I don't necessarily agree with these time frames, but the authorities in support of the extreme age of the geological era to which man belongs, though startling to the unscientific, are not simply the opinions of a few, but are substantially adopted by the leading geologists everywhere. And although antiquity so extreme for man's existence on Earth may shock some preconceived opinions, new facts are familiarizing the minds of the scientific world to this conviction. The monuments of Egypt have carried us far beyond all chronologies heretofore adopted, and when these barriers are once overleaped, it is vain for us to attempt to approximate. The plain on which the city of New Orleans is built rises but 9 feet above the level of the sea, and excavations are often made far below the level of the Gulf of Mexico. In digging for the foundations of the gas works, the Irish spadesmen, finding they had cut through timber instead of soil. Really important to remember this, you guys, because we've been talking about petrifactions, petrified forest, standing and buried, right? Trees over 1,000 feet tall, and we're going even farther and postulating that ancient mining mesas and plateaus could even be much larger examples of trees. So again, in digging the foundations, they find that they're cutting through timber instead of soil. They gave up the work and replaced by a corpse of Kentucky axemen. Okay, so they had to hire loggers to come in. Okay, we're not just talking about a few trees laying on their side. They had to hire loggers who hewn their way down through 4 successive growths of timber. The lowest so old that it cut like cheese. Abrasions of the riverbank show similar growths of sunken timber. Now, in 1812, when the Mississippi ran backwards, the Mississippi carved a completely new channel. And if you look at geological records, and there are quite a few good maps that show how the Mississippi changes its course over time. Well, let me tell you what, it changes its course overnight. And many of the reports from this era show entire forests were exposed. Huge. I mean, still standing vertical forests of dark ebony, basically trees that had been nearly petrified by their time underground, all over the Mississippi Valley. So what they're saying again here is that these people looking for foundations for gas works found 4 different levels of forest, one on top of the other. The lowest being so degraded or broken down that it was like cutting cheese, right? While stately live oaks flourish on the banks directly above them and are living witness that the soil has not changed its level for ages. Messer, Dickinson, and Brown have traced no less than 10 distinct cypress forests at different levels below the present surface in parts of Louisiana, where the range between high and low water is much greater than it is in New Orleans. These groups of trees, the live oaks on the banks, are arranged vertically above each other and are seen to the great advantage in many places in the vicinity of New Orleans. Calculations have been made by Dr. Bennett Dowler of the time of growth in each era of flora as found. Cypresses 10 feet in diameter are not uncommon in the swamps of Louisiana, and one of that kind was found standing vertically in the lowest bed of the excavation at the gasworks. I mean, just picture this in your mind, you guys. Okay, 10-foot diameter cypress trees built, standing vertically, covered, built, and then this is 4 layers. A forest grew, 10 feet diameter trees, some cataclysm, something happened, something buried, another forest, buried, another forest, buried, another forest. 4 ages, just like we've been showing with these cities all across the American Southwest, where they're going down 1, 2, 3, 4 layers of civilization, and it keeps getting more advanced. It's not like they're going to the Stone Age. It's going backwards. It doesn't make sense. So, um, has there been one flood in the Gulf of Mexico? No, it looks like there's been several events. kind of worldwide too. You know, as we step outside of anomalous America and explore some places elsewhere. I did a video I think 2 days ago on the buried ancient cities of Iran, and that they went 3 levels of civilization down, and the fourth being surface level. So same narrative here in America. Okay, where was I? Excavation, that kind was found. Okay, so it was found standing vertically. So these forests are standing vertically. They're not laid over. Okay. Of the excavation at the gas works in New Orleans. The estimated age of such a tree with 95 to 120 rings of annual growth to 1 inch is 5,700 years. The calculation to avoid all ground of cavil was only made for 2 consecutive growths of these trees, which gives us the age of 2 greater generations of 11,400 years. In the excavation at the gas works above referred to, burnt wood was found at a depth of 16 feet. And at the same depth, the workmen discovered the skeleton of a man. Now, we've been showing this as well, okay, that some of these different layers were met at different means or different ends. Some were burnt, some were petrified, and some were washed by water. So it's like a flood, a plasma event, and some kind of conflagration or a volcanic eruption of some kind. Burnt wood. Yep. This okay. So again, so at the layer 16 feet below Earth, the burnt wood layer, the skeleton of a man was found. The cranium lay beneath the roots of a cypress belonging to the fourth forest level and was in a good state of preservation. The other bones crumbled to pieces on being handled. The type of the cranium was, as might have been expected, that of the Aboriginal American race. Now, we've been showing a lot of skeletal remains and how um, that this may be misconstrued, that of the Aboriginal American race. Um, there are all phenotypes found in America, giants and pygmies. So that's kind of a broad sweep and not a very good descriptor. Again, you wish you could have more details, size of skull, thickness of skull. But just like I've said a million times, these kind of stories of the Lord of the Rings, they ring more and more truth to me. We have skeletons with tails, skeletons with wings. We have skeletons with horns, not just one, but several. We have skeletons of dwarfs, pygmies, giants. It's crazy. Lord of the Rings, the narrative and history, and Middle Earth is America, just like these kind of Atlantean overlays as well. If we take then the present era at the calculated age of 14,400 years and add 43,000 for the 3 subterranean groups, each equal to the living, this kind of goes on what I've been saying, that this seems to come in cyclical layers, and the cyclical layers seem to have a kind of repeated feel to them, um, almost like a calculatable event, an astrological age, simulation theory. Um, there are so many ways you can kind of just let your brain take these dates, and growth rings are tricky. Remember, growth rings in a tropical environment, they grow faster. So these ages could be much smaller. We have a total of 57,000 years. From this data, it appears that the human race existed in the delta of the Mississippi more than 57,000 years ago, and the 10 subterranean forests discovered, with the one now growing, established the fact that an exuberant flora existed in Louisiana more than 100,000 years earlier, so that 150,000 years ago, the Mississippi leaved, laved the magnificent cypress forest with its turbid waters. What then is the significance of a mummy or monument found in Egypt 4,000 years ago when compared with the actual skeleton of a man buried over 57,000 years ago in our native country? So, yeah, lot to unpack in there. Probably it's been one of my favorite articles of all time, but this is again why I was excited for Louisiana and how it's going to be kind of our gateway into Middle America, the Louisiana Mississippi Valley, the Missouri Valley. and all the crazy things we're going to find, because I would say probably 50% of a lot of my posts cover the Mississippi Valley. So it's a big interest of mine. Again, I have family all over the South, Louisiana, Florida, Georgia. I spent a lot of summers there. It's like a second home to me. And Old World Florida's in the channel, so he knows all about this. And again, we've talked a lot about it. If you want more information on it, um, you definitely can look at his channel or some of our collaboration videos that I have posted on mine. And we talk about this a lot. So yeah, New Orleans, not just as a trade post, but from a historical standpoint, was probably one of the most important ports in the world. We, extrapolate the idea of the Gulf Stream keeping a navigable path alive to Europe through the Ice Age, and how we've been showing that the animals frozen in ice were animals that man was living alongside with and hunting. So the Ice Age was much, much closer to our time frame than science tells us today. And the flora and fauna that's found in every state that we've done so far, 11 states, even in Alaska. That was why I started in Alaska, was because its present conditions strongly show that something major happened and that Alaska is buried in ancient cities and mosques, similar to what we find in all over America, but especially in the Gulf. And that, New Orleans being the crescent city, the Gulf of Mexico being the true Fertile Crescent. Egypt that we know it of in the Nile are but children, little babies, infants in a time frame of America that goes much, much farther back. And, the Atlantis connections to the Gulf are very powerful as well. And we'll get into that more as we go along. But yeah, so again, 138 of you here. Thanks for joining me. I'm the worst at looking at chat, but I hope everyone's enjoying the article so far. That one's really powerful. Really really changes the scope of things, um, time frame wise, historical narrative wise. And we started again reviewing the preview video about giant man and giant animal were living side by side in Louisiana, just like a lot of the other states. We're going to hop a little bit ahead and we're going to talk about Indian river names. It's going to correlate again with what we were saying about, not only is it from a archaeological and geological standpoint showing America to be far older, but as we get into the names of American rivers, we're going to show and correlate that river names, and again going back through phonetics and what we were kind of touching on a little bit at the beginning of the episode, are really important correlations. Okay. Our Indian River Names, Georgia, 1891. Curious identity with Old World nomenclature. Many persons suppose that the quaint and musical Indian names in America geographical nomenclature are wholly unlike anything else in human language. There is a belief also that the aboriginal titles of our waters are the coinage and application of the rude savages discovered here in the 15th and 16th century. Both of these ideas are erroneous. The great majority of the old aboriginal names of America have what appears to be the prototype, if not the real congener existing in many of the ancient languages of the old world. And even among the names of the recently discovered races of Central Africa are the numerous analogies and identities with our native Indian appellations. Foster, welcome. Thank you. Really key to touch on. Again, we keep going back to Egypt and old world versus new world and so on and so forth. And language is a really big important thing to touch on, because it connects so many things, not just between what we were discussing earlier with the Akkadian narratives, who were the French. The French language is very, very new. The fact that Aramaic and Arabic languages have a far deeper historical root in what we call France, which is again a huge connection. Is New Orleans New Orleans? No, it's Old Orleans. It's not New Orleans, it's Old Orleans. And when we talk about the French, we're talking about Egyptian, Moorish blood. And it goes even deeper than that, right? You know, the four phenotypes of the Egyptian cover all the races. This isn't about skin color. Um, Skin color wasn't how people identified themselves um, at all. You know, you had the Nubian, you had the Libyan, you had all these different phenotypes. And the stories of Atlantis show that the same thing was true all over the Gulf of Mexico and the Yucatan. And Aramaic and Arabic are very strong, not only in Florida, but in the Yucatan, Mexico City. A lot of what we call the Spanish language has Arabic and Aramaic roots. The Hebrew tongue and correlations here are very powerful. Phoenicians, obviously, you know, they hold the kind of foundational root there. And who are the Phoenicians? Well, I'll tell you what, they were controlling a lot of uh, this area, and the time frames are supporting that more as we get farther into this, right? Oki equals water in native language. Yeah, oh yeah. Well, I'll just keep reading. I'll stop rambling. In fact, the river names show so many analogies with the appellations of the old world that they confirm the belief in mind, best informed on the subject, that the American prehistoric man himself sprang from the old world races. Yeah. Yeah, because they were here. The man is not sui generis, some Latin term, sui generis. That is evident. He appears to be a mongrel, the result of a crossing of the white European and the black Moorish races, for he is not the Mongolian of the East. Again, phenotypes and all these things were living side by side. We've been showing this from Alaska all the way to here again. Phenotypes, skin color, different races, giants, pygmies, all these people were living in giant cities together. Not the Mongolian of the East. Now, again, the Mongolian and the old world Chinese is of Finnish design, Phoenician. The old Chinese pictographs and hieroglyphics, which they do exist, are found all over Mexico, South America, Middle America, and you're going to find them all over the Mississippi Valley as well, as we're going to show as we go farther into this series. The old American names tell the story of the prehistoric man's origin in terms of higher significance and truth than any other evidence now known to exist. Again, the strength of knowing languages. The old world peoples of antiquity built their river nomenclature from belief nomosyllabic germs of the prehistoric speech. The great bulk of the nomenclature of the New World appears to have been constructed upon the models known to exist in the ancient civilizations of the East. Yeah, it's the opposite. We've been showing again the correlations here with Phoenician, Block Hebrew, on and on. You know, there's one source. It goes back to one source. And out of the identical germ, words employed by the prehistoric races of the older world. Yeah, the older world. Yes, the Eastern world river names come from here. Even the very words and names of the ancients are reproduced in the nomenclature of America in great frequency, whether purposely or by chance. By chance, I mean, that's ridiculous. Man is wise enough to dare to assert with the assurance of historical truth in his favor. Many words from the oldest languages known, Hebrew and Chinese, are found in our ancient Indian appellations. Now remember, Chinese, just like Etruscan and many others, have a Finnish language root. Finnish, Hebrew, Phoenician, they're almost identical. Same thing. And are found in our ancient Indian appellations. Yes. Yuba is in the Hebrew a term for water, Yuba. We have two rivers named Yuba in California, and in South America, a river and a lake have the name written Ubol. France has the river Ubay, and Africa has the Ubai. The Russian Empire has the river named Ubi or Obi. That's what Longo was just mentioning. Yor or Yar is a word for river in Hebrew, and in Russia also. Yer, Yar, and Yor are river names in England, France, and Central America. We have also Yar Aguba, Agua. I apologize, it's a little fuzzy on my screen. Australia has the Yara Yara, which is like the Walla Walla in Oregon. Yeah, and an amazing place. Walla Walla, Oregon looks like the Grand Canyon. It's crazy. Africa has the Yari Ba, China has the Yari-O, and Scotland has the Yarrow. The old Hebrew name of the Nile was Yor. Gara is in India. Garba is in Hindustan. Garo is in China. Gara is in Ireland. Gary is in Scotland. Gary or Gura is in Germany. Guar in France. Gor in Central Africa. And we have in America Gara, Guriba, Garago, and other Garas. And these names are also considered native in the countries where they're found. Yeah, the language is ancient. The word sir or sarasa is used in Hebrew synonyms with our term water. The river names of the world in Sara are countless. Sara is a river in Russia and in France. Sar in Switzerland. Sar is a river and a bayou in Louisiana. We have also in America in water nomenclature Saranac, Sarari, Saratoga, and other Saras. Our Saratoga, no one questioning the fact that it is a Native American, is precisely the same thing as the Russian Saraloka. Saranika, or Latin Sararona, like our Saraneka, was the ancient name of the Aegean Sea. Sarabet and Sarawak are in Asia, and Saragossa in Spain. Our name, Washita, anciently written in French, Owachita. Now, this isn't important because we're going to get into the Washita Nation. We're going to talk about the rivers Washita, the tribe Washita, the language, is strikingly like the Polish name, Otrita. Now, as somebody with a Polish last name myself, my Polish last name is Greek. How does that make any sense? And again, my grandfather is Scottish, my grandmother is Cherokee, and as we talked a little bit about who were the Acadians of New Scotland. Well, you look into some of these Confederate soldiers wearing Scottish tartan like the Micmac. It becomes very curious subject matter. Another curious name, which no one not versed in such matters would ever suppose had anything like it elsewhere, is the Central African lake Ujiji, every one of whose letters, except one, requires the dot in writing. But Spain has the Ujijija, and South America has the river Jujui. These are all doubtless corruptions of an older word. The Russian name Volga or Volga, either one correct, has its analogy in the Alabama River name Wolki. Now, this is interesting again because we've, old world Florida again, so many correlations here. Muscovy, right? And even the river names are connected with Alabama and Russia. The name Yazoo of Mississippi is duplicated in Yazwa of Russia and in Yazi of Central Africa. One name, Catawba, unquestionably Southern Indian, is precisely the same as the Arabian name Kataba. Yeah, Kataba. This perhaps thousands of years older than the American word. Central African gives a duplicate in Katiba. Central African has the river Monoga. In America, we have the river name Monongahela, with its dialect suffix "ella," the significance of which is unknown. Central African also has the Congo. In America, we have the Congaree and also the Kahono. The word Ganga, the true word for the name Ganges, is a Hindu word for river. Congo and Ganga are identities. Both Kanga and Konki are rivers in Asia. Central Africa has the Low Wambo, or simply the River Wando. Low given by Stanley and Livington as a term for river or water. We have Wando, a river in South Carolina. The Hindu language shows that Wando, Ondo, Hondo, or Indu are all the same, an Oriental term for deep waters or the sea. The Spanish language for Hondo for lake. We have not only the river named Wando, but there is in Central America the name Honduras, Andorachi. This really Andori was the Indian name for Lake George. So yeah, I thanks for sticking with me through all of the murderings of those tricky words that I did there. But again, for people that want to go back and look at these titles and cross reference and really deep dive into it, it's in the thread on Twitter, which will be in the description of this video once it's done recording. So yeah, you can just kind of see the correlations. And again, if you only have a very small perception or only invested a little bit of time into all these different subjects we cover on this show, that's not going to seem like much. But the phonetic and language crossovers continually show kind of that pre-Babel narrative, and the Phoenicians had a huge grasp on the Gulf of Mexico, and for sure the Mississippi River. And again, as we get farther up the Mississippi through this series, we're going to find more and more and more evidence that the Mississippi was the original river of Egypt, or at least the Egyptians of America. And the dates show that this area is far, far older. And like as we've covered through the American Southwest, very, very many authors comparatively showing that Europe was in a wilderness when these cities were first constructed. So, yeah, again, I know I murdered a lot of those words, so I apologize for that. Um, Before I pivot and go into this cave story, I wanted to talk a little bit about AtlantisBolivia.org, fantastic website that I used so long ago. But we're just going to kind of do a quick overview here since we're talking about um, bayous and man-made canals and showing the Mississippi and how it was controlled and its flow was manipulated and its ancient history and all the different levels of buried forest that lie beneath its grounds. And yeah, so Louisiana's lost wetlands. Earlier studies using high resolution Google Earth satellite. After this, we'll jump on Google Earth a little bit and show a little bit of what I've found and my good friend 13th Monkey has found. The Gulf of Mexico is just full of stuff like this. And as we've shown through Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, canals, thousands and thousands of miles of canals exist not only from Louisiana, but they go all the way through California, Oregon, and even into Alaska. So basically, he goes on to say that he's put this page together showing that the location first brought to public attention by John Jensen. See Ancient Canal Builders. Fantastic article and lots of good material there. Claiming Louisiana site as the home of Atlantis. John's page proposes that an ancient aqueduct-based culture flourished in the Americas since the Gulf Coast is covered in the remains of apparently ancient canals about 135 feet wide and extra wide canals such as about one state of 605 feet and even greater canals as much as 900 feet in width. Some of these canals run into the sea in what is now the Gulf of Mexico, crossing islands and emerging on land again, suggesting they were built at a time when the water level was lower. i.e., before the land was drowned at the end of the last ice age by the rising waters of the Gulf of Mexico. However, the great majority of canals in this area were created by the oil industry, and this is true in some sense, but it's also not true because oil and gas owe their time frame to the earliest part of the 1800s. And as I was showing you with some of these old maps, um, these canal systems were popping up in the late 1700s, and I would say they probably existed much earlier, but due to flooding, were buried. So above this example of double lane canal is part of a vast complex of canals. So again, you guys should check out Ancient Canal Builders by John Jensen. Um, yeah, just corroborating that the Gulf of Mexico has so many endless Atlantean overlays that it's just mind-boggling. Again, Old World Florida has shown Florida's examples. We've talked a lot about the pile driver, lake dwellers, the Phoenician overlays, that all of the cities in this region were built on the water like Venice, and that Venice is the newer creation of this older world here, and that Tenochtitlan, Mexico City, was the true old world Venice, and it goes on and on. You find this all over the Gulf of Mexico, and yeah, so just kind of look at some of these pictures. He's just kind of showing you. I mean, it's insane, you guys. The amount of labor to build these canals that no one uses today. Nobody. It's mind blowing. There's no better example, except in some parts of Africa, of the most amount of terraforming I've ever seen. So you can see where parts of the land that were obviously still parts of this have been either washed away by some event or deteriorated over long periods of time. But you see these straight lines existing where there was more than likely a giant piece of land here still here, and this canal went all the way through it, right? On and on. More canals. Huge. 135 feet. Okay. That's nothing to scoff at. And you just imagine there are literally thousands of miles of canals in Louisiana, thousands of them. And the modern narrative is that the gas and oil industry built them all, which is absurd, completely absurd. They exist on old maps long before these industries took over. Remnants, Atlantean remnants, again, the Micmac languages, Egyptian overlays, quote, Chinese, the river names. We're dealing with a ancient Atlantean type culture that was pre-flood, where there was probably at least one, if not just a few handful of languages. Um, and the remnants of our language system today show that it all comes from one source. Anyways, you just look at these images, you guys. I hope you can. Oh, it's not scrolling. That's really annoying. So that's not helping you guys at all. Okay, let's see if I can fix that. Okay, so again, I apologize for that. We can just go back through the images, no big deal. So this is what the page shows. I'll have a link to this in the description. And again, Ancient Canal Builders by John Jensen. Unbelievable. I don't have enough time to go into all of his material, but his relations touch on a lot of what we've been saying. Ben is the one talking on screen. Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, my name's Benjamin. Longo gave me the name Ben just because I talk about lodestones and pyramids. I have the Ben tattooed on me. Yeah, as well as the Giza Plateau. Some of my past work, I've talked about authors in the 1910s and 20s who postulated that the Giza Plateau was really the true Noah's Ark, and that the Giza pyramids complex were covered in salt water, and that they lied buried beneath a salty ocean for at least 1,000 years, and that the Ark is the entrance. The Giza pyramid is an entrance. It's a telescope and an entrance into the subterranean world, that there are thousands of miles underneath Giza. I've also gone as far as to say that when you look at old maps of Cairo, the Giza Plateau is on top of an ancient tree stump. and that all of these tunneling subterranean worlds are mankind living inside of ancient trees, and that the pyramids, even the Native Americans, quote, Native Americans of the Americas, say that the pyramids of Mexico and of the Mississippi Valley were built to survive floods and connect to underground tunnels and cave systems. And I agree with that 100%. So yeah, I apologize. It was frozen for some reason, so I was scrolling through these images and you weren't seeing them. But look at this, you guys. This is Louisiana. Louisiana is the most terraformed state in America. It's unbelievable. Thousands and thousands of miles of canals. Some of them are 900 feet wide. Some of them are 100 feet wide. And they go over islands that have been completely destroyed. I would say that Louisiana was like in Atlantis. It was probably populated by millions and millions and millions of people with tons of homes and cities built on piles in the ocean. So here he's showing again, he's measuring canals. The link for this, Atlantis, Bolivia, Canals, Louisiana. You can just see these islands. These islands are abandoned. There's no towns on any of these. Okay, and the narrative from the 1900s and to now is that the oil and gas industry built all these canals, and that's just absolutely absurd. So yeah, you can kind of see what he's touching on here. In this, he shows the above ice age shoreline is the dotted shoreline here. Many canals were dug throughout the wetlands to give access to exploration wells. Yeah, that's really silly. There is a ton of evidence that shows a few hundred miles of gas wells and canals were dug, but thousands and thousands of miles were already here long before oil and gas was exploited in Louisiana. Now, could this have been an oil and gas industry from a prehistoric age or an age before ours? Absolutely. I've been showing that oil and gas were known of and used. Again, going back to the Edgar Cayce reference I made earlier, Edgar Cayce in his Atlantean book, the Atlanteans were using natural gas. They were using crystal technology. They had an advanced mineralogy understanding. I'm sure they were using radium. Yeah, they were dug with horse and buggy. And yeah, that is the narrative they say today, that these thousands of miles of canals were dug for oil and gas. It's just absolutely ridiculous. When you look at some of the dredging boats they had in the time period, they're tiny, and you would need like 100,000 of these boats and hundreds of thousands of men, and you still wouldn't have enough time to dig all these canals. So yeah, there's a few star forts here in Louisiana we'll go look at. Some remnants of rings. Again, the rising waters have created a sunken harbor. This kind of correlates with some of Dr. Longo and Old World Florida stuff where we've been talking about these. Dr. Greg Little, his explorations. He's connected with Edgar Cayce as well. So many overlaps. He's shown a lot of these sunken harbors for boats that were anywhere from 800 to 1,200 feet long. So absolutely gigantic boats, gigantic men. Crazy. Coastal waterway map. But again, just, this is just stuff you guys got to see. It looks like, a Venice. It looks like a neighborhood of today with the roads and the little cutaways. But just imagine that this was all Venetian style cities with homes built on pillars. That's what I see. I mean, the canals, look at this. This looks like your modern day roadway with like a cul-de-sac, and they're everywhere. All over the bayous. All over the bayous. Everywhere. And of course, man have taken up homes on some of these bayous. But look at these images, you guys. It's just unbelievable. So yeah, just wanted to show that. Great reference again as we talk about the ancient constructions and the labors involved in making Louisiana what it is. We showed this map from the 1700s, and then we showed here's the old Star 40 version from 1725 of New Orleans. We show this map here. This whole construction is new, and you can see just what would be involved there, right? Just building this with dredging in the terms of, as we know from 1700s, would be a monumental task. let alone crisscrossing the entire state with thousands of miles of endless canals. So while we're on the canal subject, I want to read Our Mississippi Bayous, the Work of a Prehistoric People. And before I jump into there, I just want to thank every one of you for being here. You know, I'm not good at you know, checking chat all the time, and you know, missing missing the frozen screen where you guys aren't seeing all the images I was sharing. So sorry about that. But what's everybody think so far? How do you feel about Louisiana? You could think of Louisiana as like probably one of the most important port cities in the Gulf of Mexico, if not the most important port. Um, yeah. So again, for anyone that's new um, to my series, I see a lot of new names. Thanks for joining me. Hope you're enjoying it. Anybody that gets up at this hour to partake in a live, I'm so grateful for all of you, and I hope you appreciate all the work I put into this show. Um, and yeah, if you aren't familiar, I set a pretty lofty goal for June, and I'll be putting a new video out every single day. It's been a lot. It's been hard, but I've stuck to it so far. Here we are, 6-6, and yeah. So let's hope I can stick to that. It's tough to do. Um, you know, baseball's been crazy. Buddha Girl, really love your videos, Ben. Thanks. Thank you so much. Your donations are um, very much appreciated. They go a long way. Oh, 13th Monkey. There's 13th Monkey, you guys. We're going to, you know what, since he's in chat, we're going to hop on Google Earth right now. We'll come back to this article. We're going to hop on Google Earth right now since Monkey's in chat. Because we're going to look at his KMZ file. Okay. Now, if you aren't familiar with 13th Monkey, it's flickering on my screen. Tell me if it's flickering on the stream. I had this problem last time. Tell me if there's a flicker. If there is, I will stop and reload. If there's not, I'm going to keep going. 13th Monkey was my first interview on this channel, you guys. You should go back and watch it. And the Archivist series is the name of my interview series. He's episode 1. He had to be episode 1 because we show the whole realm is a kind of construct in a sense. And the vastness of it is pretty eye-opening and unbelievable. All good so far. No flicker. Okay, so we're gonna, you know, time is it's already 6:40. Holy smokes, time's flying, and I have a lot of stuff I want to talk about. So let's just peruse through here. 13th Monkey KMZ file. Look at all this stuff, you guys. This is just America. Okay. You go over here to Europe. Look at this. This is all his work. Look at this, you guys. These are star forts, walls, canals, towers, you name it. Look at that. Nobody has spent more time mapping Google Earth than 13th Monkey. We're definitely going to do another episode together. I've been getting a lot of questions about that. So, yeah, we're going to come into America. Me and him have spent time going through so many old maps, and a lot of the Civil War maps showed a lot of star forts that nobody knows about. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. But anyways, back to Louisiana. We're not going to be able to do this very long because it's flickering horribly. I'm going to have a seizure. If I die, it'd have been all for this episode. So yeah, there's a few stars here. We'll focus in on these, but I also just kind of wanted to give you an overhead view of how easy it is with Google Earth to just have your mind blown by the apparent um, terraforming of this area that is Louisiana. So you guys can just see it from here, okay? It's everywhere. The entire bayou is covered in canals, the entire bayou. Okay, and this whole part of the Mississippi here, this is all a construct. This is man-made. These 4 entryways, 1, 2, 3, 4 entryways into the Mississippi. This is all dredged. Okay, and it was dredged in ancient times. You can see how it's just a river separated from the ocean by a bayou that's crisscrossed with huge canals. And these canals are everywhere. Everywhere. You can see them. Hopefully, you could see them. These straight lines, right? Straight lined waterways don't exist in nature. So you can just see hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of miles of canals, uninhabited. You can go in, zoom at these, all these straight lines, canals, canals, canals. Some are inhabited today, but I guarantee you they're there much, much older, much long before the people we talk about today. Let's just zoom in on some of these stars. Okay, great example here. Might have to change the time frame a little bit to get a better resolution. Boom, there we go. Look at this bad boy. Okay, this thing's been destroyed. Old fort with canals and very interesting waterways. Canals, 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 straight lines everywhere. There isn't a place that hasn't been touched. Go over here. We're just going to look at what Mike has marked. Another star fort. Okay. Again, the narrative again here is that these were built by the French for outposts of war, but that's not the case. And as we get farther up the Mississippi, they're going to show you why these are not built for war, and they're built in such out of the way places that there would be no purpose for them. There will be stars here where you can't necessarily on the surface see, but you can see the obvious pitching and points here. This is interesting. You see all the old batteries here. The walls have been washed away, but you can see the old batteries here, you guys. Now, what are batteries? Why are they called batteries? I've hypothesized a lot over the years of what star forts are really for. They're obviously of an etheric nature. When you study cymatics and thought forms and how human thought morphs cymatic waves, star forts and their odd construction resemble human thought and cymatics very closely. So I would say there's absolutely an etheric undertone to all star forts. They have to do with water. They have to do with natural gas. Me and Mike have been showing a lot over the years. Natural gas played a big part in a lot of this as well. I would even go as far as to say mining was a part. Old giant rock walls transporting gas lines. Okay, we already viewed that one. We'll spend just a few more minutes here. Again, not always going to know exactly what Mike's marking here. We marked old forts as well, where there's probably not remnants of. As we get into the Mississippi State episode, we're going to show that they were disassembling old forts and old stone walls to build Capitol buildings and stone buildings. A lot of the stone buildings of America are from disassembled. So here's the location of that star fort I showed earlier, right? The New Orleans star fort from the 1700s. You can see the outline, but you can see how hard it is to spot it unless you have old maps to go by. Yeah. So again, the canals. I just recommend you go on Google Earth if you're interested in this, because you can do this in Texas. Remember, we talked about the buried city under Galveston. Okay, let's just go to Galveston real quick, even though this is Louisiana. I showed in my Texas episode that the entire city of Galveston is built on the remnants of an ancient city that was hit by a tidal wave. Okay, and they found hundreds of thousands of skeletons. The people were all still in these buildings, and that the wave was so large that the silt from the wave covered the civilization, and they're still locked away in there. That's what Galveston's built on. The whole Galveston is built on an ancient city. And I would go as far as to say that much of the big cities of the Gulf are built on the remains of ancient cities. I'll cover this a lot when we get to Florida because I have tons of articles there. But I'd go as far as to say that this exists all over this region. So yeah, this is literally flickering horribly for me. So I hope that was kind of informative to you. I know I bounced all over the place. I just strongly recommend you spend some of your own time in Google Earth, and you'll continually have your mind blown. It's an amazing resource and worth your own investigating. And if you haven't seen again my episode with 13th Monkey, we spend a few hours on Google Earth looking at some of this stuff all over the realm. So that's definitely worth going back and seeing. Okay, so I have at least three really important ones I want to share. So we're going to read these. I'm going to try and be efficient. 165 people watching. Appreciate all of you guys so much for being here. Make sure to leave your comments, questions, and I'll get to those later today. And again, stay tuned. I will have a vote on Twitter, and I'll have a vote in YouTube. It'll be between Arkansas and Mississippi. So you guys choose what next week's episode is going to be. Bum, 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 ba-dum. Here we go. Okay, it's showing. Perfect. Zooming in. Are Mississippi bayous the work of prehistoric people? Okay, let's see if I should just make this larger. See if it helps. Boom. Okay, that's better. That's better. All right. This is a Louisiana article from 1912. Now, this covers the bayous. Okay, they're talking about areas in Mississippi as well as Louisiana, but this is remember this when we talk about all the bayous, Texas all the way to Florida. Are they the work of prehistoric people? Eminent engineer, after long studies, declares declares they were ancient artificial waterways for early Americans. Now, like we just showed with that previous person, that author goes as far as to say that this whole area is Atlantis and that the endless thousands and thousands of miles of canals were built by an advanced race housing millions of people. And I agree with that. Isola, Mississippi, December 14th. Are the bayous of the Mississippi Delta of natural origin? Nobody seems ever to have imagined otherwise. But now an eminent civil engineer, Major Lamaro Fontaine, PhD, who has spent 40 odd years in that region, comes forward and declares that they are artificial waterways dug in very ancient times by a long vanished race of people in the Yazoo. Now, remember that traces back to the article where we were talking about the phonetic overlays of all the river names and how they're found all over the world. In the Yazoo, Mississippi country, the like of which, topographically speaking, is not to be found anywhere else in the world. He has traversed thousands of miles of bayous and has carefully mapped them. He says that all of them, taken together, form a comprehensive system. They are, in fact, canals, meeting each other usually at right angles. Yeah, as we kind of showed there, and I'm glad we hopped on Google Earth before we um, jumped into this article, give you some visuals as well as the articles together. Why were these canals dug? Major Fontaine answers that they were excavated for drainage purposes by clever engineers who understood the control of water currents. By this means, in very ancient times, the entire delta was made available for cultivation. Thus, for historic, one should rather say prehistoric reasons, it is most appropriate that the Mississippi of today should be called the Bayou State and her citizens mud turtles. At first glance, it seems difficult to realize how so gigantic a task could have been undertaken successfully by a primitive race of people. But to this objection, the mayor replies that the same remark might equally be applied to many other works of remote antiquity in South America and elsewhere. Like the pyramids of Egypt, the bayous were dug by immense numbers of slaves under the direction of intelligent taskmasters. When correctly mapped, The whole delta assumes the aspect of a checkerboard of waterways, unmistakably artificial, built as refuge places. The principal object of building these mounds was probably to establish refuge during periods of flood. Now, he goes without even noticing, but the pyramids play a huge role in this too. Not only were we living below ground and above ground, not only were pyramids part of flood control, for the pyramid itself causes cavitation and draws water to the surface. They were already known by the aboriginal, quote, aboriginal races of America that pyramids were vaults into the subterranean world to survive floods. So the bayous played a role in this as well. Not only were they used for farming and agriculture, but I would say they were kind of defensive as well for hurricanes and other high water events. Okay. They were flood when the father of waters overflowed its banks and inundated the delta. The people could find safety on such artificial elevations. Inside of them, who Major Fontaine has excavated several, were large chambers lined with a sort of pebble concrete, which were intended for storage of food. Again, tunnels connected a lot of the really big pyramids, and as we go farther up the Mississippi, we're going to show that. They weren't just burial chambers, although some were. They were for storage of food and for people. Thus, the primitive inhabitants of the country were enabled to withstand a siege of the waters, so to speak, for a considerable period. The Major has gone so far as to reconstruct this vanished civilization to some extent. He has even built a small village of primitive house, concealed in shape and composed of poles and tree bark, such as he supposes the ancients to have occupied. To make the thing complete, he has hired Negroes of both sexes, young and old, to attire themselves in breech clouts and petticoats of sacking, and thus, disguised as Aborigines, has photographed them. Now, really important sentence. Okay, who were the Aborigines of Louisiana? Well, the Muskogee relations of Old World Florida show a lot of Old World connections. Arabic, um, the narratives of the slave trade bringing the quote black race from Africa is completely ridiculous, and that one of the oldest phenotypes in this region was, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, Nubian and these dark skinned races, right? And the more important thing to remember is that they were living in settlements with all of these different phenotypes: giants, pygmies, dwarfs, black, white, Asian. It didn't matter. You found them all over. That was a very telling part of my connection with the stories of Atlantis, because Atlantis tells of the same thing, these root races all living together. The language thing, we showed that the languages keep going back to this type of a civilization. You're finding the same things here. Black Indians, right? Indians, Aramaic, Arabic, Hebraic, Indians, Egyptian, Micmac. I mean, the narrative falls apart. These mound builders of old in the Delta could erect no permanent structures such as those which has survived the wear and tear of thousands of years in Mexico and Peru, because in that alluvial region there was no obtainable stone. And we're going to show that that's not true at all. Okay, when we get into Mississippi, if that's chosen next week, we can talk about the Great Wall of Mississippi, the Chinese wall found in America. It's just buried. The real old stuff is buried. Even in these alluvial plains, there's plenty of stone. Hence, it is that all of their works have passed away. That's because there was some crazy event, for sure, if not several. Just like we talked about with Galveston. Stone City. Galveston is a stone city where people were still found in their homes, buried. Giant tidal wave buried an ancient stone city. This lies beneath Louisiana, I'm sure. Even New Orleans is built on old stone cities, guaranteed. That all the works have passed away, with the exception of the checkered board of the bayous and a few of their mounds. They made excellent pottery. In fact, as far back as 1879, the people of a Mississippi town discovered that this pottery had a commercial value and proceeded to dig it up in quantities from mounds in the neighborhood. A regular mining fever for aboriginal bric-a-brac broke out, and a considerable amount of money was earned. The prehistoric jugs, dishes, etc., being sold to enterprising merchants who disposed of it to museums and collectors. The problem of the mound builders has occupied for some years past a good deal of the attention of the Government Bureau of Ethnology. Its experts have dug into more than 2,000 mounds in various parts of the country and have come across some very surprising things. Thus, for example, in a number of such tumuli, which is an old word for mound, in the Middle West were discovered curious ornaments of sheet copper exhibiting an artistic knowledge far beyond that of any modern Indians. Now, one just needs to go back through our episodes already, and we've shown that many, many mounds that they called mountains were buried cities. And I would say we could go as far as to say that about many of the mounds of the Mississippi Valley. Some were burial chambers, sure. Were some buried towns and giant buildings? Absolutely. Ornaments of copper far beyond. The latter, ignorant of their insignificance, call them thunderbirds. They seem to be ceremonial ornaments, some of them representing men wearing helmets and carrying scepters in their hands. The mound builders. There is hardly any part of the country where prehistoric mounds are not to be found, although, of course, a great many of them have been obliterated by modern agriculture. That's 100% shown. We covered that all over the world. We've shown that in the Southwest. The crazy thing about the American Southwest is that so much of a desert covers these regions, they become arid and no one lives there. But there's a lot of Arizona where they've completely just repurposed the thousands of miles of canals that are in Arizona. And remember, the Arizona canals are the most ancient version of terracotta found, older than China. So terracotta and cobblestone canals. Can you imagine the labor just in digging these canals, let alone they burned the clay to a terracotta consistency, and the bottom of the canals were lined with cobblestones. Remember, thousands of miles of canals. What, billions then? Billions of cobblestones, and the clay burnt to a terracotta consistency. Incredibly advanced, not just dug with a basket and a scoop. It's ridiculous. The number in the aggregate hundreds of thousands and occur all the way from the Atlantic to the Pacific and from the Mexican line to the Canadian border. He's talking about mounds. They number in the thousands, hundreds of thousands. I agree 100%. And they're not just burials; they're buried cities. Going all the way back to Anomalous America episode 1, they found hundreds of buried towns in Alaska. Hundreds. They found that on top of a buried town, really weird types of flowers grew. In the article I shared, they go, "Oh, we can easily find these buried cities because only these types of flowers grow on top of them." And they would just find the flower. Oh, there's a city. Oh, find a patch of these flowers. There's a city. And they did this all the way along the Aleutian Islands into Russia. Hundreds, if not thousands, of buried towns going back to a tropical age inhabited by millions of people. This realm was probably populated from stem to stern by billions and billions and billions of people. By far the most remarkable, however, are the so called effigy mounds, which are made to represent various animals. Now, just remember, if it's on the surface level, it's not very old because we're going down hundreds of feet and finding very advanced things 100 feet down or more. The effigy mounds, which are made to represent various animals in Wisconsin, there is an extraordinary group designed to a great extent in the imitation of lizards and birds. There are hundreds of them on bluffs overlooking the Mississippi and hundreds more across the river in Iowa. It is obvious that they have an emblematic significance, and the supposition is that the animals concerned were the totems or heraldic devices of various clans. Thus, of a bear, the mounds of the snake, or of boars, the mounds of the snake clan, took the form of a serpent, and so on. Very likely, these tumuli served anciently as sites for council houses. The whole valley of Prairie de Chenin Township is dotted with deer, bears, antlered elks, etc., in droves, all heading, like the river, to the southwest. Some of the birds have a spread of 250 feet from wingtip to wingtip. Certain mounds along, supposed to represent men, are probably swallow-tailed birds. Effigy mounds are the oldest. The Bureau of Ethnology believes that the effigy mounds are the oldest of all the mounds, which idea in itself is enough to render them highly interesting. Doubtless, many of them date back for tens of thousands of years, if they are not much more ancient. A remarkable feature of them is the imitative curving or carving and rounding of the bodies of the animals. It is evident that they could have been built in such numbers and of so great a size only by a sedentary population, meaning not a wandering nomadic type, but a city state type of people. And we've been showing gigantic cities, of course. I mean, look at Louisiana. And they must have been the work of many centuries, absolutely. And we showed that the buried forest on buried forest on buried forest corroborates what we've been seeing in the American Southwest with city built on city built on city. In a group of mounds near Chillicothe, Ohio, were found hundreds of skeletons wearing copper masks. Again, hundreds of skeletons wearing copper masks. And as we go farther up the Mississippi, you're going to be blown away by what they find in some of these burial mounds. These doubtless had some ceremonial significance. Together with the skeletons were discovered immense quantities of pearls. Yeah, not only immense quantities of pearls, you guys, but gigantic pearls. And we've talked about petrified clams that were 3-4 feet long. So pretty crazy. Giant pearls, as big as baseballs. Together with the skeleton, yep, there were dozens of pearls nearly as big as English walnuts. Blue apples, welcome, thank you. Did you hear that? There were pearls as big as English walnuts and fit for crown jewels. That is to say, they must have once been suitable for royal regalia. But all of them had been rendered worthless by decay and long burial. The most remarkable assemblages of prehistoric mounds in the United States, both for number and size, is the famous Cahokia group opposite St. Louis in Illinois. Now wait till we get to this region. It's going to blow your mind. Man, such tumuli contained thousands of skulls, showing that they were used for burial purposes. In an Iowa mound was found the skeleton of a giant who must have been 6 inches over 7 feet in height. Around his neck was a collar of bear's teeth. Now we're going to get into king of the mound builders and all sorts of really crazy stuff. A skull from a mound in Alabama was entirely filled with small snail shells. The puzzle is to imagine why. In another mound, the government experts came across a large central chamber in which were 11 skeletons arranged in a circle with their backs against the walls, while in their midst was a great seashell, which had been converted into a drinking cup. This goes to Atlantis, and there's so many interesting overlays here with the shells and giant shells and lake pillar, ocean dwelling Venetian cultures of the entire Gulf state. A farmer in Bollinger County, Missouri, while plowing over a mound, struck a stone coffin containing a skeleton in a gourd-shaped vessel filled with lead ore, so pure that he turned it into bullets. It was not uncommon for the builders of such tumuli to intern their dead in coffins of this kind. That is to say, walled with slabs of stone. Some of the mounds hold caches filled with corn and evidently many centuries old. Now, one just needs to go back to my mummy corn video, and you'll see that many of the mummies of America, Egyptian type mummies, were buried with corn. And when they planted the corn, it grew over 13 to 15 feet tall. Corn for giants. The lowest corn cob, the corn cob was up to 3 feet long, you guys. Corn cob's 3 feet long, okay? And the lowest stalk of corn was like 8 feet off the ground. So you couldn't even harvest the corn unless you were 7.5, 8 feet tall. In one near Chillicothe was dug up a hollow metal bird with many perforations. Its use is a mystery, but probably it had some magical significance and belonged to a prehistoric medicine man. The famous Hope Mound in Florida yielded copper breastplates set with pearls, and in other mounds in the same state, the excavators came across copper snakes of highly artistic workmanship. Yeah, and these copper snakes, as I've shown in a previous article and talked about with Dr. Longo, look very Egyptian. The iconography is eerily Egyptian. And when you look at some of the, again, talking about King Ramses and some of the iconography of King Ramses III, it's pretty crazy. Where was Egypt? Where's the old world? Vanished race, a myth. Now, whatever may be the truth in regard to the early inhabitants of Yazoo, Mississippi Delta, the origin of the bayous, it is not believed by the Bureau of Ethnology that the mounds so plentifully scattered over all parts of the United States were built by a lost race antedating the Indians. Well, yeah, because what lies beneath them is what antedates many of the Indians and is far more ancient. Undoubtedly, most of them are prehistoric, dating back, that is to say, to a period before Columbus. Well, of course. Now, what did Columbus say when he landed in the Gulf? He said, "I'm in Asia. Welcome." And he brought Jewish translators. He came to Asia and brought Jewish Hebrew translators. But it is thought that the ancestors of the Indians themselves were responsible for them. In other words, this idea be accepted. The vanished race of mound builders is a myth, pure and simple. In 10% of the mounds dug by the government experts were found articles of white man's manufacture. Now, this is erroneous. We've shown that white man's manufacture goes way, way back to an Atlantean age, such as brass kettles, steel knives, showing that they were constructed after the whites came. Erroneous as well. The most advanced weapon technology existed in the American Southwest, and they date to 50,000 years, lining up with what we've been showing with these buried civilizations. They say go back 150,000 years, and the Mississippi being the oldest river on Earth. I don't agree with those dates necessarily, but again, the antiquity is ancient, and these guys are just scraping the surface and saying this isn't ancient. They're saying it's prehistoric. It is ancient. You go far enough down, it gets crazier and crazier. And we're going to show that as we go along. We've already been showing that, but we're going to keep showing that as we go up the Mississippi. In other words, this idea being accepted, the vanished race of mound builders. Okay, I already covered that. In fact, the building of mounds by the Indians is still going on. The late J.W. Powell himself saw 2 mounds in process of construction. Now, remember, the burial chamber mounds are the most closest to our time frame. And often they find that their burial mounds are built on top of more ancient mounds that the people had no idea were there. This is like cities that wash away or are exposed in floods, and the natives, quote natives, have no idea how it got there. Yeah, because again, we're talking about buried civilizations under, in some cases 20, 30 feet of debris. Just like Galveston, Texas, the people had no idea, and then in the 30s, they're building some roadway or a bridge, and they dig down and find an ancient city buried. It's like Pompeii all over America. Objects found in the mounds, other than those of white man's make, are nearly all exactly like those manufactured by modern Indians. Now, again, we're disproving that. This you have to chew the meat and spit out the bones with a lot of this stuff, and not all these authors have all the material that we've been discussing here. Thunderbirds, magnifying glasses, um, struck with dyes, which means, of course, that they were made by the whites. It's absolutely ridiculous. So that's just incredible. They were casting things in this time period, which we've been showing. It goes back and etching. The oldest cast, the oldest etching, some of the oldest armor was made here in America, and they had brass. They were tempering copper, which we still can't even temper copper to the quality that these people were tempering copper. And the Phoenicians controlled the copper mines of the Great Lakes, and you can find that copper on all continents. It covered the globe. So this was a worldwide civilization. As for the copper mass, the Indians knew how to get copper long before the days of Columbus. Having found a rock that contained copper, they built a fire. Yeah, copper was incredibly easy to smelt. So through has been the study of this interesting subject that the government experts are even able to guess with reasonable assurance of accuracy what tribes of Indians were anciently responsible for the building of many of these groups of mounds. They say that the mounds in the valley of the Delaware and Ohio were constructed probably by the Delawares, that's Delaware Indians. Those in Kentucky and northern Georgia were built by the Shawnees. The Tumuli in northern Mississippi are attributed to the Chickasaws, and those of the Gulf states elsewhere to the Muskogee tribes. The mounds of East Tennessee and West Carolina were built mostly by the Cherokees many centuries ago, and the same tribe was probably responsible for the ancient works of the same sort in the Kanawha Valley of West Virginia. So yeah, as we go farther up the Mississippi, we're going to disprove a lot of that later paragraph and part of this story. But the most important part is basically what he was saying here early on in the beginning, that undoubtedly the complexity and enormity of these canal structures lend themselves to, again, as we were stating earlier, to what I would say an Atlantean culture. Is it Atlantis? Who knows? It shows a lot of markers to be very, very much related to that. But no matter what, the story we're told today of these constructions is completely erroneous. These existed for, centuries, and they definitely weren't built by gas companies. So yeah. Where to next did I want to do? This one was a sea serpent, but I don't think I'm gonna talk about that one. We're gonna talk about salt. Man, there's so much material that I just won't get to cover. Um, Louisiana sits on a gigantic bed of salt, and basically they were talking about they found ancient salt caves that were carved by an ancient race, of course, ancient race. And if you look at some of the images of these salt caves of Avery Island, it's incredible. They're like giant cities underground, giant salt cities underground. And there are salt cave cities in Europe where people have been living underground for 1,000 years. How crazy is that? 10 generations. And there are generations of these families that have never seen sunlight. In fact, the horses, they have boats, they have horses, they have canals, they have rivers, everything. The horses have been underground so long they're blind. It's incredible. And you could go that far with a lot of these ancient subterranean myths, if you want to call them myths, and that kind of like the Mayan cosmology, that the 7 races of Earth emerged from inner Earth, and that they all came to the surface from inside the Earth. Pretty incredible. It sounds like a fantasy, but it makes more sense to me as I go through these articles. Man, there was one I really wanted to talk about. Yeah, I'm not going to get to it. Okay, let's go back to the thread, and I'll just show you guys where it is so you can read it. I'm going to do a video on this because unfortunately we're out of time. but it's called A Cave of Wonders. A man finds and enters a cave in Louisiana, finding a magical world full of cities and golden dressed dwarves. Upon exiting the cave, decades have gone by and the world above has completely changed. So I kind of wanted to finish with this one, but it's a long one, so there's no way I'll be able to get through it. So again, if you could just go on my Twitter thread here, which I'll put in the description, you can come down here to A Cave of Wonders. I'll do a video recording. Maybe this will be my video for tomorrow. Will be this article. I don't know. We'll see if I have time. But yeah, so let's spend a little time in chat. What's everybody think? Huh? Is everyone enjoying the series? What's everyone going to vote for? Are we going to pick Arkansas? Or are we going to pick Mississippi? What's the direction, you guys? Tell me what you're thinking. Any questions or anything you want to say before we close up shop for the day? And like I said, new videos every day in June, so please be checking on those. And the vote will be posted today, so make sure to check my YouTube community post because you'll see the vote there. Make sure to check on Twitter. You'll see the vote there as well. Mississippi versus Arkansas. I have unbelievable material for both states. Yeah, and I didn't get to cover even a small percentage of what I wanted to talk about today, but that's typical with these shows. 2 hours is really a tiny fraction of time. And ultimately, I just want you all to know how grateful I am that you join me and that you spend your time here with me because I don't take that lightly. Your time is your most valuable resource, nothing else. So spend it wisely and don't undervalue your time. And yeah, love you all so very much. Stellium, Brett, Joe, Hippie, Disciple, JJ, Jason, Timothy. So many familiar faces, so many new faces. All my new members today. It means a lot. There'll be a once a month member live stream where we kind of talk about the future of the channel. Um, I take everyone's opinions very seriously, and we're going to work on building and kind of steering this whole ship as a community. And so at the end of June, since I just started the members thing, at the end of June will be the first episode of that. Just a quick little live stream checking in with everybody. Um, so yeah, and like I said, for those who are maybe new to the chat or new to the channel or new to the understanding of the memberships, my members get access to a new video series every month with a new video every week. This month's video series is about Atlantis, and next month's video series is about Lemuria. We're going to be bridging connections again. The first episode is about a British explorer who builds 2 submarines in the 1920s before World War One and comes to the Gulf of Mexico looking for Atlantis. Really amazing. Yeah. And for those that just want to stick with free material, you'll still get access to those videos. They'll just be posted a little bit farther down the road. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, Lemuria is going to be great. Nico, thanks for being here. We're going to be showing Lemurian remnants in California. What was the war between Atlantis and Lemuria? What is Lemuria? Yeah. So yeah, again, thank you to everyone that joined the membership during this channel. Holy smokes, to Boo Girl for your donations. Your donations are amazing. They mean a lot to me. They're just going into a fund to continue the channel. Working on some really special content. By the end of summer, I'm going to be kicking off Archivist Adventures, where I'll be exploring and traveling around in physical space, and led by your guys' votes. You're going to decide where and what I do in these areas, and it should be a lot of fun. As you all know, time is precious, and finding the time to do all these, all these things I want to do is very difficult. So I appreciate your patience and stay tuned for all the new material. Check in every day, like I said. And yeah, make sure to look for the vote. Make sure to get your vote in. Yeah, because going forward, every episode is going to be chosen by you guys. So keep that in mind. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. Getting up early, it means a lot to me. Love you all very much. Um, I'm doing a live stream with Dr. Longo on Wednesday. So don't miss that. Um, 5 p.m. Was that 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern? That should be a lot of fun. I have a few other interviews lined up if time permitting. So, yeah, thanks again, guys. Love you all very much. Make sure to post your questions and comments, and I'll check them all out. Charles, thanks for joining, and love you guys very much. Have a wonderful day. Peace.